Welcome to State of the State, the monthly roundup of policy and research for the state of Michigan, brought to you by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University and our friends at WKAR Studios. I'm Arnold Weinfeld, Associate Director for the Institute. Joining me today is Institute Director, Dr. Matt Grossmann, and economist, Dr. Charley Ballard. Later on, we'll be joined by our guest, Dr. Deborah Horner, who is with the University of Michigan Ford School Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy, where she serves as Senior Program Manager on the Michigan Public Policy Survey Program. Dr. Horner will be discussing recent survey results just released yesterday of local government officials' confidence in election security. And that'll certainly be interesting to hear about that. But Charley and Matt, always a lot to talk about. Things are always happening. Charley, let's start, I guess, with the economy. The Fed has again raised interest rates, sinking my retirement funds even further. What's in your crystal ball?
Well, the portion of my crystal ball that thinks that we will have a recession sometime in the next 6 to 9 months, that is more likely, it seems, because the Fed has taken a very aggressive approach. There were some folks who suggested they should take a little pause and see how things go. But Chairman Powell's remarks just a few days ago indicate a very hawkish stance on inflation. And this reminds me of 1979-80 when Paul Volcker was the chair of the Federal Reserve, and their priority was to stamp out inflation. And if that took a recession, that's a cost that they were willing to bear. And that's kind of the way it looks. It's not an absolute certainty, but this is a very strong position by the Fed. So we'll see what happens in the next few months. I will say that they've already succeeded in taking the steam out of the housing market in the United States. The housing market used to be, only a few months ago, was white hot, and then it was red hot, and now it's kind of cold. Housing starts down, housing prices down, because the borrowing costs associated with getting a mortgage are way up to levels that we haven't seen in decades. The Chinese economy is also slowing down, so globally, we look like inflationary pressures are moderating. How much they're moderating, we're not sure, but certainly it's not as hot as it was a couple months ago. But along with the moderation of inflation pressures, you're seeing a slowdown in growth. We're not yet in a recession, so far as I can tell, but there's a good chance that could happen at some point in the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, mortgage interest rates now have almost doubled from historic lows. They're over 6%. But the housing market is only one side of the economy. The job market still seems to be very strong.
Absolutely.
So I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into a recession, are there not?
Absolutely. It's still a mixed picture. There was some talk when we had 2 consecutive quarters during which real gross domestic product fell. Some people use a very crude rule of thumb that says that that's a recession, but that's putting way too much weight on one indicator. And so far this year, we've added close to 3 million jobs in the U.S. economy. So it's a mixed picture. There are some indicators that are still strong, other indicators that have weakened, and where that will go, we're not sure yet. Now, I will say one thing that is so obvious because it's on great big signs everywhere you go: the price of gasoline is down by well over $1 a gallon below what it was in June. And that's something that a lot of people pay attention to. And so that's one of the reasons why the year-over-year inflation was down last month, because gasoline had spiked so high in the summer. So we'll see. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Arnold. There's just Uh, when you've got an economy that's made up of 150 million households and 5 or 10 million businesses and open borders with the rest of the world, more or less, no single indicator is sufficient to tell us what's going on. We have to look at all sorts of things and see how it goes.
And we still have a war overseas that now apparently will indeed drag on for is anyone's guess. How has the world economy or the economy in world economy and the United States economy adjusted to what's going on over in Europe?
Well, lots of ways. Europe is, of course, scrambling to find enough energy supplies to get through this coming winter, and the United States is a part of that scramble. They're building liquefied natural gas terminals. We're providing some of that. One thing that's definitely happened anytime that there's turmoil on the world scene, and the war in Ukraine is certainly turmoil on the world scene, no question, that tends to make investors want to go to safety. And the U.S. has traditionally been viewed as a safe harbor for investments. If you put that together with the higher interest rates associated with the Fed's move, lots of investors around the world have been pulling their money into the U.S. And that means that the dollar is at historic highs. Dollar is very strong, and that's good news and bad news. If you want to buy imported things, that's really good. If you're an American company and you're trying to export, that's not so good. So my advice is, if you've got your vacation to Ireland, go ahead with it, because the dollar is strong. If you're a company trying to export, I wish you all the best of luck.
And Matt, let's turn to you, because all that Charley has said has implications politically. We're now deep into the 2022 campaign season, about a month and a half from the election. How have you seen this impacting political races here in Michigan or across the country?
Well, normally, of course, bad economic news would be bad for the incumbent party of the presidency and the governor, which is the Democrats, who already should be having, if historical patterns remain, a bad midterm as the first midterm of the new president's term, and after a somewhat successful round of policymaking in DC. And yet, we are not seeing signs of a traditional midterm backlash. That is, we still have about even generic ballot, about even expectations for the U.S. House and Senate, and because of redistricting in Michigan, relatively even expectations for our own state legislature. And we have a governor's race, which looks surprisingly sleepy and uncompetitive, if you believe the polls. That is, the Democrats appear to be doing a lot better than a normal midterm. Now, 2018 was actually a normal midterm for the amount of backlash that we see to the president's party. So if you think back to 2018, and it sure seemed like a Democratic wave year, lots of gains in across the country. That's actually was a normal sized gain for the out of power party. So Democrats could be doing a lot better than normal and still not be doing well in the midterm election. We also have the continuing problem with believing the polls. That is, in both 2016 and 2020, the polls were off in favor of Democrats in some of the same places. The 2018 Senate race polls were also not very good, although other polls were better. And we don't always know that it's going to be off in the same direction. So the 2012 polls in Michigan were actually off in favor of the Republicans. So we never know exactly what is going to repeat. But if you believe the polls, A lot is going better than expected for Democrats this year, given the economic news and given just the normal political patterns. People are upset about inflation, but they are also upset about the abortion decision that was made by the Supreme Court. And this is the rare cycle where the abortion decision is, which was a decision made basically by the party out of power, was actually the biggest move and the most unpopular move made. So we are seeing a backlash, but it's not of the typical kind.
Yeah, you mentioned both things that, especially redistricting, that I think many people, especially nationally, are not paying attention to here in Michigan, that will definitely influence the state house and state senate races for sure. I think that's an important factor. And then you mentioned the abortion decision by the Supreme Court. We have one ballot proposal, probably two actually, that will be draw Democratic voters to the polls. You mentioned the abortion issue, and we do have a ballot proposal here that would secure the right to abortion in the Michigan Constitution. And we also have one other ballot proposal that would also secure voting rights within the Constitution as well. And those are typically two issues that would draw out Democratic voters. And from my read across the country, voter registration is up, especially amongst women. And we've already seen impacts of the Roe v. Wade decision in states that one would think would not be impacted, such as Kansas.
Well, that's right. And just to reinforce a couple of those points, the Michigan State House and State Senate would be unlikely to be competitive under the previous lines. So they are competitive because we moved from a very Republican-leaning map to a relatively even map, such that if the Democrats were to get more votes for the state house or the state senate statewide, they would be much more likely to win a majority of districts now than they have been in the past. And of course, Michigan is the state where abortion should be the most front and center because of the ballot initiative that will enshrine abortion rights in the Constitution if it passes. I'm a little more skeptical that any of the other initiatives are going to raise turnout, but certainly we have seen effects of the abortion decision and obviously the Kansas referendum, which had midterm level turnout for the abortion referendum and saw big gains for the pro-choice side.
Yes.
Yeah, also,
go ahead, Charlie.
Also, the two candidates for governor in Michigan have starkly different views about reproductive rights, and that's likely to generate some interest.
Yeah, and they are taking advantage of it on the Democratic side because they definitely see it as, first of all, people don't really know who Tudor Dixon is, and so it's an opportunity to tell them one thing about Tudor Dixon, which is her a position on abortion. And it's part of a nationwide pattern. Democratic ads on abortion are up by like 50 times compared to previous cycles. And it has been the number one issue in the last few weeks. So they are seeing an opportunity, and especially in Michigan, because policy doesn't change very often this dramatically without people having an expectation that it would and against public opinion. That's a sort of a rare event. And it has produced a backlash.
Well, one of the issues regarding the election here in Michigan or elsewhere across the country over the last few years has been election security. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Deborah Horner to the program. As I noted, Dr. Horner is with the University of Michigan Ford School Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy and is Senior Program Manager on the Michigan Public Policy Survey. So to those in our audience who might think, oh, they have a U of M person on, yes, we have a U of M person on. As a matter of fact, we often partner at IPPSR with Dr. Horner and her team at the MPPS and the Ford School, most recently providing support to the Redistricting Commission. So Deborah, welcome to the program. Good to see you again. I know that you have been involved with this program since its inception. As a matter of fact, help to bring it to fruition. So you've been doing a lot of survey work of local government officials over the course of time, and certainly this most recent one is very timely. regarding election security. What did you find out?
Hi. Yeah, thank you for having me on today. We do a survey every year, sometimes twice a year, of local officials across the state of Michigan. It's actually a census survey. So we survey all 1,856 jurisdictions across the state, counties, cities, townships, villages. And we do it every year. We pick different topics depending on what's particularly relevant. We really try to focus on fiscal health a lot. But in 2020, we realized the change in election law based on the 2018 constitutional amendment that made a lot of revisions to election administration, like no excuse absentee ballot and being able to register on election day, things like that. We're going to pose a lot of challenges to clerks. So we asked a whole battery of questions about election administration in 2020. And got lots of good data about what clerks thought was going to happen in November. Well, leading into this election wave, we thought we better check back in with them to see what they thought about election security, given a lot of the subsequent to 2020 concerns around election security in the state of Michigan and information, misinformation, and lots of scandal, honestly, about what is happening with tabulating machines and what's happening with fraud. And so we wanted to go to the clerks themselves and find out from them what they were concerned about, what they thought might be problems for them in the election, and then how secure they felt their local elections were, since the townships and the cities in Michigan are the ones who actually run elections. And what we found this year is a lot more confidence in election security and election administration in general than there was in 2020. What we found is, in terms of election security, we asked local officials about their confidence in their final results, in their voting machines, in their voter rolls, whether they thought those would be compromised during the upcoming election. And 85% said we are very confident in all of those things. We are confident that there will be no tampering or hacking or compromise of our voter rolls, our voter machines, anything that revolving the election security. And that was way up from only 63% who said the same in 2020. So I think the local officials really learned a lot of lessons in 2020, and they've seen a lot of this controversy around election administration over the past 2 years, and they have really buckled down and locked down their processes and been very diligent, and now they are really confident that they have the election security well in hand. There were only about 2% statewide, so a handful of jurisdictions who said they weren't confident that they were going to be able to have secure elections. They did say there were going to be some problems potentially looking ahead to November, but those were also really way down from 2020. So in 2020, lots of people were very concerned about recruiting poll workers, but I think primarily because of the COVID pandemic had just hit Michigan, and they didn't know if workers were going to come out for the 2020 during the pandemic. This year, they're much more confident they'll be able to recruit poll workers, although there's still some concern. About 30% say that they are worried about getting workers to the polls to make sure they can conduct the elections successfully. But a lot of the other problems they thought they might have, equipment problems, poll worker errors, inaccuracies in their voter list, all that stuff is way down. They really feel like they've got the election administration stuff well in hand. One of the things they are more concerned about than 2 years ago are things like disruption from people at the polls coming and causing problems. And then also with misinformation and disinformation about exactly how voting is going to be conducted.
That disruption continues to be, and misinformation continues to be. It's interesting that they're more confident on being able to recruit poll workers. Of course, we know that probably both parties have been heavily recruiting poll workers as well. And so that will be an interesting dynamic, I think, as to what might very well be more partisan poll workers than we have seen in the past, either challenging or ensuring that people can vote. So was this across the board, or were there differences between the smaller communities and larger communities? I mean, I know you, like you said, you survey across the entire state and get a great response. So I'm just wondering how this varied between our urban, rural, and suburban communities.
Right. I mean, that is one of the really nice things about our survey. We get back about 1,300 responses every wave. So it's like 70% plus jurisdictions across the state respond to the survey. So we can really drill down pretty deep into what's going on in specific types of communities. And yes, across the board, there's a lot of confidence in election security. So in smaller places, the very smallest places that have under 1,500 residents in their small township or their very small city, say 87% say, yep, we've got this covered, election security is fine. In the largest places, with the cities and just a handful of townships that are over 30,000 people, 95% said we are confident, very confident that our election security is well in hand. Our voter rolls, our tabulators, what we report out to the county at the end of the election night, all of those things are safe. And in fact, the just kind of overall that they're going to be able to conduct an accurate election. Small places are like 81%, yes, we're good. Large places, 83% said, yes, we're very confident we're going to have an accurate election this time around.
Well, this is all, that's very good news that those that administer our elections are feeling that confident. And of course, we'll see what happens on election day and beyond as well. Matt, Charley, what are we seeing across the country, even in terms of election security issues?
Well, I had a question actually about you said they are more concerned about misinformation. I know that you are also talking to reporters trying to get out this kind of information, but you're also kind of going against this track that people may not sort of want to believe these findings or their local election officials. So how is the sort of media conveying these findings and talk about kind of your own experience with getting over people's misinformation or concerns or trying to address them?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the problems is that some of the concerns are out there about different jurisdictions, right? There has been allegations about tampering and sharing of voting machines and concerns about fraud, right? Those do exist out there, but they're pretty anecdotal. And so our survey looks statewide. And so if we're looking at 1,800 jurisdictions, well, it's closer to 1,500 with cities and townships. Those are very rare occurrences. So even if there is some shenanigans going on, they really are just spotty across state. On the other hand, we want 100% secure elections. We don't want any uncertainty about which elections are accurate and which ones aren't. And so there's kind of a dichotomy at play of the media wanting to play up the concerns and the controversies around the places that do have strange things going on, but that at the same time, we actually don't want anyone to have controversy or hacking or tampering with the elections. And so I think what I want to get out there is that the clerks across the state are taking this very seriously. They are professional, well-trained people who want elections to be run well. They don't want to have partisan bickering. For the most part, they are just absolutely laser focused on this and working extremely hard with themselves, their staff, to make sure that these elections are accurate and not biased toward anyone, and not allowing any kind of fraud, and being very careful about who can vote and that the people who are allowed to vote are the correct voters. So that's kind of the message I want to get out, is that although there is concern about misinformation, the clerks themselves really want to reassure everyone that they're working hard to make sure that these are accurate and non-fraudulent elections.
Very encouraging news. But while we still have a few minutes, I want the listeners to know that Dr. Horner, the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy at the University of Michigan, has one of the great acronyms. The acronym is Close Up. So it
is, yes. And so we are close up in our local communities, trying to find out what's actually happening on the ground in our various communities at close up. So yes, but kind of going back, we have another piece of data that I think is interesting and we can talk about is, so I've just spent a ton of time talking about how local clerks are really confident. They know what they're doing. Their processes are locked down. Their processes are correct. But they also have concern about other jurisdictions across the state. So even though they themselves know my jurisdiction, my township, my city is 100%. We're ready to go. We're not going to have any trouble. They still, in their minds, have doubts about whether other clerks or other jurisdictions are going to do this right. So, you know, I mean, it's not widespread doubts, but it's way less confidence. So, kind of statewide, fewer than half say that same level of very confident in other jurisdictions.
Well, that's pretty.
That's not so good. So
yeah.
It does strike me that maybe clerks are you know, can see with their own eyes what they're doing in their own offices and in their own voting places, but residents across Michigan, they themselves have a little bit of concern. Now, there's only like 11% who say they don't have confidence. I mean, that other bulk of people are I'm somewhat confident in other places, but there is still, you know, even though they themselves will reassure everyone, my township is secure, my city is secure, they're still a little worried about other jurisdictions. And they say that their residents are concerned too. So we often ask local officials to kind of be good reporters for their local community. They really know what's going on. They have their finger on the pulse of what's happening with their residents. And they've told us that, well, our residents aren't really sure whether our election is going to be safe. Even though I know our election is going to be safe, their confidence is lower. You know, there's only about half who say our residents are really confident in our election. So this misinformation is really a problem for our elections. You know, if you think about it just as a kind of a democratic theory of people feeling like they are having the decision-making in terms of electing their leaders and making decisions on ballot proposals, if we don't have confidence that the election outcomes are correct, then that kind of is a really basic flaw in the system. And so even these clerks, even these people who are working day to day in their own jurisdictions to ensure complete accuracy, even they are worried about other people's elections, and they think their residents are worried about their own elections. So it is a concern that we need to deal with kind of societally to figure out ways that we can reassure the populace and the voters that these elections are the correct outcomes that everyone's preferences.
The clerk's attitude reminds me of the attitude we hear often that it's not my congressional representative, it's yours that's the problem. So that's pretty familiar. Well, Dr. Horner, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Greatly appreciate your work with local government officials and the work that we do together from time to time.
Well, in only a couple of months, we'll know the election results. And so we'll be able to see what happened and whether people believe that what happened is what actually happened.
Charley's right. We'll get results soon. I do want to emphasize my usual message that the people should participate and feel good about participating. And sometimes the messages that we send out are about legitimate concerns. We don't like the way election rules were changed, or we're worried that people are going to be suppressed in their voting, but it is easier to register and vote than it ever has before, and people should take advantage of that and participate.
Yeah, I do think that that's a great point. And I think that, you know, whether you supported or opposed the recent Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade is a great indication of how every vote does count, even at the judicial level, and implicating who gets to appoint what judges. So thank you both again. Greatly appreciate your time with us this morning. And my thanks again to Russ White and the staff here at WKAR for support of this program. Join us again next month on State of the State.